Hey, what's good, everybody? I'd like to welcome you all back to the Boombox Guru channel. I'm your host, LB. So before I begin today's video, I just want to ask all you that are tuning in if you could just like the video, share the video, as well as subscribe to the channel because it does help out a lot. So today's video is CD update number 25. Man, I'm going to be discussing two bands that I think are very important to the heavy metal music, and these bands are called Black Death and Sound Barrier. Now, the reason why these two bands are very important is because Black Death and Sound Barrier, they hold a distinction and they're noted as being the first all African American heavy metal bands to exist. And not too many people know about these bands because, unfortunately, during their initial run, mainstream success eluded them. You know, they didn't really get the proper push that they deserved. But as years went on, you know, people rediscovered these bands and they discovered their music. And now, today, they're highly regarded within the metal scene. And they're also a big inspiration to a lot of black musicians who are active in the metal scene. You know, whether they be rock musicians, guitar players, these bands were a huge inspiration to a lot of people, and they were really good. I mean, they played with some of the greatest bands of all time that went on to have much more commercial success than they did. They were contemporaries with a lot of these bands, and highly regarded. And also, you know, people like me who are fans who listen to this type of music, they also were very inspiring to people like me who really like this music. And it was just really good to just see bands who look like me playing this type of music. It made me and I'm sure a whole lot of other people feel like, okay, we're not alone out here. There's other people out here who are like-minded and are into the similar things that I am. So both of these bands really uh they're really pioneering, you know. And you got to understand that both Black Death and Sound Barrier, they formed, this was years before Living Color even burst on the scene. They formed and put out music way before bands like Living Color, 24/7 Spies, so many others. And even these days and times, you know, you have Tosin Abasi, who's the leader of Animals as a New Leader. That gentleman, he's one of the greatest guitar players of this generation. You know, so many other bands out there that are forming that are either all African American or they have maybe one or two black musicians members in the band, and they're making strides in this scene. So these these two bands, I guess you could say, they had to crawl so the other ones could walk, so to speak, man. So they were way ahead of their time, and it's just really interesting to discover these bands and to see that they were doing their thing way back then when it was a lot more, I guess, unheard of and really unseen. But some great metal bands. You know, recently I managed to purchase their material. Neither band has a vast discography of music, so it was quite easy for me to you know, research and find where their music was available. And I gotta tell you, man, all these albums that I'm about to show you and briefly discuss with you, man, some great music. And I hope you guys enjoy this video, man, as we go into CD update number 25, discussing Black Death and Sound Barrier, America's first all-black heavy metal bands. All right, so the first band we're going to start with is Black Death, because chronologically they actually formed about 3 years before Sound Barrier. And Black Death actually formed back in 1977 in Cleveland, Ohio. And they are noted as being the first all African American heavy metal band to exist. So in 1984, the band actually released this album, their self-titled debut album called Black Death. It was released on a small independent label in Cleveland, in the band's native of Cleveland, Ohio, called Auburn Records. Now, this CD version that I have right here, this is a reissue that was released in 2017 by Hell's Headbangers. I actually bought mine off of Amazon because Hell's Headbangers actually doesn't have any more copies of this CD available on their website. But I found mine on Amazon, and I also seen where there was a lot of copies of it available on eBay and Discogs and other online like music stores where you, if you want to get a hard copy. And it's also available on Spotify, so go check it out on Spotify as well. So like I said, this album came out in 1984 on a small independent label called Auburn Records. The band members at this time were Siki Spacek on vocals and lead guitar, Greg Hicks on guitar, Daryl Harris on bass, and Philip Bullard on drums. And when the band formed in its early years, they went through several lineup changes. I know at one point in 1979, their original bassist, who I can't think of his name at the moment, actually, let me look in the booklet because I think they mentioned him in this booklet. If I'm not quite sure, let me see here. Yeah, Claiborne Pickens was his name. Their original bassist, Claiborne Pickens, he actually was unalived back in 1979, which is how Daryl Harris ended up becoming a member. He was brought in after his Claiborne Pickens' untimely passing back in 1979. So like I said, man, this album came out originally on a small independent label called Auburn Records, and because of that, the album it pretty much went virtually unknown outside of the band's native of Ohio. So not too many people outside of that region really knew about this band, but they were very popular within the city of Cleveland. I think they were probably one of, if not the most popular live act in that city. You know, even before they put out this album, they were known for their live shows. And of course, you know, with all the members being black, that was also a pretty good draw as well. But aside from their race, they were well known for being a really good band. I mean, they really knew how to rock out and play some heavy metal. And like I said earlier, this came out in 2017. It includes 2 bonus tracks on here called "Here Comes the Wrecking Crew" and "Retribution." Those 2 songs were originally released as a 7-inch along with the original LP that came out in '84. You know, because you know that was the 1980s. You know, you had limitations on how much music you can put on an album, especially a vinyl record. So those 2 songs, they're essentially a part of the actual album, but they couldn't fit on the regular record, so they just put it out as a 7-inch. So people who bought that original album back in the day, they actually got a free 7-inch to go along with it with 2 extra tracks, man. So you're probably wondering, well, how did this band become well known? How did this album end up being reissued years later? How did they end up becoming a highly regarded band within the metal community if nobody knew about them at the time when this album came out? So here's the answer to that question. So how Black Death ended up becoming popular outside of their native Cleveland, Ohio, is that this was years after the band had broke up. I think the band broke up around 1988. I believe they went on like a long hiatus. But this album cover, if you look at it, this album cover started floating around, I believe, in the early 2010s. It started floating around on the internet and became a very popular meme. It was meant to be a joke towards like the black metal genre, like a joke / pun. But what happened was a lot of people started to really do their research, and they discovered that Black Death was a real band and that they actually had this album out. And when people found the record, heard it, they were blown away at how great it was. And it quickly started making its rounds throughout the metal community, and people dug the record because it's really good music. I mean, people came across what was initially a lost gem in heavy metal, and it really helped to give the band exposure further outside of Ohio. And because of this, I would say it actually caused the band to reunite. Not in the way that you think, though, which I will get to later, but it just really shed a light on a lost gem, in my opinion. Like, this was a very overlooked album outside of where the band was from, and it really shed a light on them. And their story is I guess you could say it's kind of similar to the punk band called Death that was from Detroit. I think they were from the east side of Detroit. I don't know if you all ever seen that documentary called A Band Called Death, but the way that these guys got rediscovered and this album started to become very popular within the metal scene, it was kind of similar to that story as well. But this was a really good record. You know, as far as the sound wise, man, this is some really good raw traditional heavy metal. You know, there's a lot of influences that you can hear from like Judas Priest, Iron Maiden, but I think the most important influence that you hear on this record is Black Sabbath. And just to let you guys know, most of you might think that, and this is me included at first, most of you might think that the name Black Death is because all the members of the band are black and they're playing heavy metal. But no, the real reason why this band was called Black Death was because of vocalist Siki Spacek. He was heavily inspired by Black Sabbath. When he first heard the song Children of the Grave by Black Sabbath, that's what really inspired him as a guitar player. And so he's a huge fan of Sabbath, and he came up with the name Black Death is sort of like an inspiration of Black Sabbath. It really didn't have nothing to do with the band members being all black. But Sabbath is a huge influence throughout this whole entire record, man, because you get a lot of those spooky, slow doom metal tracks, kind of similar to what Black Sabbath did on the Master of Reality album. So there's a lot of things that kind of harken that style of that slow and spooky doom metal, as well as the galloping rhythms of what Black Sabbath did on Children of the Grave, as well as similar to like early Maiden and Judas Priest sound. Now, the production on here is not the greatest, but I will say that kind of adds to the appeal of the record because it's raw. It packs a lot of grit. It has a very underground feel to it, which I like, and I think that underground aesthetic is really what adds to the greatness of this record, man, because it adds to that spooky and eeriness of it. Because I believe this record came out on Halloween in 1984, so I think this record originally came out on October 31st of 1984. So yeah, the production may not be pristine, but it works in this record's favor, especially with the sound of it sonically. And you know what, Siki Spacek is a great vocalist, and he's a great guitarist, lead guitarist. I mean, he shreds all over through this album, and his vocal performance on here is probably one of the best I've ever heard. Honestly, he can sing in a low register, but then he can switch to like this high register and do these wails and screams or something, man. Almost close to like Rob Halford in some ways. He's just really great, very versatile. I mean, and his shredding and his guitar solos are amazing. And lyrically, the music, it kind of switches between Street Tales and fantasy. You got songs like Streetwalker, which is about, women of the night. You got The Scream of the Iron Messiah, which has a kind of like that early Maiden feel to it, as well as lyrical, lyrics based in fantasy and so forth. Night of the Living Dead, which is a great album opener. The Hunger. Probably the biggest highlight on here is When Tears Run Red, which is a slow, doomy number. And Siki just gives a very passionate performance on that particular song. But this is a great record that I think a lot of people really need to hear, because it's just awesome heavy metal. And I'm glad that meme really helped shed a light on this band, and people were able to get their hands on for a long time what was a lost classic in heavy metal. But as far as Black Death recently, there seems to be two versions of the band that are active. One version is led by guitarist Greg Hicks under the original name Black Death, and then there's another version that's led by Siki Spacek under the name Black Death Resurrected. And so apparently there's been a split between the two. I think the split is what actually caused the band to break up back in the late 80s, back in 88. And it's rumored that they actually recorded a second unreleased album in 1988 that never got released, to my knowledge, because of the breakup between Siki Spacek and this whatever drama that came about between him and Greg Hicks. That's the reason why that record didn't get released. Although I heard it came out on a box set that I haven't yet found yet. But anyways, despite of the split between Greg Hicks and Siki Spacek, I just gotta still give a shout out to both of these brothers for keeping the Black Death name going and the legacy continuing, man. Because it's amazing that this was, for so many years, that this album went without a lot of people knowing about who they were. And for a meme that was meant to be a joke, it actually ends up becoming like a lost classic that's being rediscovered by so many people. And like I said, man, this album, if you're not into hard copies, this album is available on DSPs. I know it's on Spotify. I'm not so sure about other streaming services. I assume it's available on there. But definitely check this album out, man. This is some good heavy metal. This is for fans of people of Black Sabbath, especially of that Master Reality era Black Sabbath. If you're somebody that's a fan of that raw power of traditional heavy metal, you're definitely gonna dig this record, man. So definitely give this album a listen. Shout out to Black Death and Black Death Resurrected, man. I hope one day maybe the band can all just get back together and iron out their differences, man. But until then, definitely go listen to this record, man. Great heavy metal music right here that I think everybody needs to know about. More people need to check out. So yes, Black Death, self-titled debut album right here, 1984. Check it out, y'all. All right, so next band that we're going to talk about is Sound Barrier. Now, Sound Barrier, they are a American heavy metal band from Los Angeles, California, and they were formed in 1980. And along with Black Death, they are noted as being one of the first all African American heavy metal bands to exist. But there's one other distinction that Sound Barrier holds, and that's that they were actually the first all African American heavy metal band to be signed to a major label, which was MCA. And the band has released 2 studio albums so far, Total Control, Speed of Light, and 1 EP called Born to Rock. So right now, we're going to talk about their first album, which is called Total Control. This was released in 1983. This is a CD version. This CD version is actually a reissue that was released by Old Metal Records, and that's a label that's owned by King Fowley, who I believe he's the front man of that band called October 31st. I'm not that familiar with them. I know of them, but I've never listened to their music. But I know he owns a label where he's like reissued a lot of classic and maybe I guess rare classic metal albums, and this album happened to be one of those that came out on that label back in 2001. I found this on Discogs. Actually, wasn't too many. I couldn't really find a whole lot of CD versions of this. All I could mainly find was the vinyl versions, which maybe one day I'll go back and get a vinyl copy of this as well. But yeah, man, Sound Barrier Total Control released in 1983, debut album right here. And the band lineup at this time was the original lineup, which is Tracy Spacey T Singleton on guitars, Bernie K on vocals, Stanley E on bass, and Dave Scavito Brown on drums. Now, because Sound Barrier were actually signed to MCA, they were able to gain a little bit wider exposure as opposed to Black Death. You know, Black Death's album came out on an independent label, so they didn't really reach too much outside of where they were from. But Sound Barrier actually they had a little bit of a push behind them because of MCA. They had a video from one of the songs from this album called Rock Without the Roll, which actually received minor airplay on MTV. And I actually know people personally in my real life who were of age at that time, and they actually remember seeing this video air on MTV back in the day. So for the most part, man, you know, Total Control, you know, this is a straightforward heavy metal album. However, there are some subtle elements that give this album uniqueness. There's a slight R&B and soul influence that can be heard, particularly in certain parts of the title track. You know, in the short ballad "Hey You," you know, vocalist Bernie K, his performance really blends a lot of soul and R&B, a lot of soul and R&B influences along with his rock style. And that's something that's really, those are just 2 songs that stick out the most to me when it comes to that. But honestly, as I went back and revisited this album a little bit more, that style is pretty much all over the album. In a lot of ways, it's pretty much all over the album, which I thought was pretty cool. Also, bassist Stanley E, man, he has a subtle funk style in his performance that gives the album a nice groove throughout. And I would say Spacey T, aka Tracy Singleton, there's the elements in his guitar playing that's a bit groovy, in my opinion. So and this was like 1983, so this was like a few years, like several years before groove metal really became a thing. So there's just this, because of that R&B and soul and those subtle funk influences, it gives this record a nice groove throughout the whole entire album. So unfortunately though, Total Control, it only sold 12,000 copies because MCA failed to properly push the album and promote the band. MCA did not know how to market an all-black heavy metal band. And also, I think another thing that happened was that the agent that actually signed Sound Barrier to MCA, he got fired, and there was nobody left in their corner at the label, so they just, they just kind of just overlooked them. And Bernie K actually said in an interview that I watched, what's that channel called? It's Inside Metal. He did an interview. He did the interview like over 10 years ago at this point, but he said that he remembers all of them sitting in the meeting with the label people, and they're just sitting at the table talking about how we're gonna market this band, and they're like in the corner like, hey, like a rock band. But they were just so hung up on the band's race that they just didn't even think, well, okay, they're all black, but they're playing heavy metal. Let's just market them like other metal bands. But they didn't do that. But in any case, it's unfortunate that the MCA dropped the ball on pushing this album, pushing this band, because I think they really could have really done something very unique and extraordinary like years before. They could have been ahead of the game right then and there with this band, but unfortunately they just weren't smart enough to know what to do. Now this reissue, I forgot to mention it earlier, it also comes with the Born to Rock EP. Let me show you guys right quick if you can see it. But yeah, the last 4 or 5 tracks, 1, 2, 3, 4, yeah, the last 5 tracks on this reissue, that is actually the Born to Rock EP. I think you can see it right there as it says it. Now the Born to Rock EP, when the band released this EP, they actually had been dropped by MCA at this point, so they self-released this EP, and it was a really great EP. The only thing about this EP is that it finds the band going more for a straight heavy metal sound. So a lot of those minor R&B, soul, and funk influences that were on the actual Total Control album, for the most part, they're abandoned on this Born to Rock EP. Like, this is like traditional heavy metal, traditional American heavy metal. You know what I'm saying? But those are like just one of my few gripes about this EP, is that it lacks that groove of Total Control. I wish they would have kind of at least kept that groove that Total Control had on there. But otherwise, man, the Born to Rock EP was a great release. They actually shot a video for the title track, Born to Rock. They actually shot a really cool video for that. And that was also like one of the first videos I saw at Sound Barrier when I first discovered them like over a decade ago. And to go along with the change in sound, Born to Rock is also a foreshadowing of the band's next album, Speed of Light. So this was like a trend. I guess the Born to Rock EP in a lot of ways was a transitional period for the band. And this was also the Born to Rock EP was also the last release that they did with Stanley E. He would end up leaving the band, I think in 1986, right before they start working on the second album. Alright, so still talking about Sound Barrier, we're going to go into their second album called Speed of Light, released in 1986. And this album, this is a reissue, but it originally came out on Metal Blade Records. So after they got dropped by MCA, self-released the EP Born to Rock, they signed to the legendary Metal Blade Records. And this is a band photo right here. Right, so Speed of Light, like I said, Stanley E, he ended up leaving the band in 1986. I think before they started working on Speed of Light. And he was replaced by Romanian-born Emil Lek. So Speed of Light, to me, this album was them expanding upon the traditional heavy metal sound of the Born to Rock EP. Although I think they take it further and they go into European power metal territory. And I think that change in sound can be attributed to, the new bassist at the time, Emil Lek, because he was European. He was from Romania. And then Bernie K also said in the interview, I think it was that same interview I watched a couple of weeks ago, where he said that Spacey T was listening to a lot of Judas Priest and Iron Maiden at the time, and they had a lot of influence on the songwriting and the musical direction of this record. And Speed of Light is actually often overlooked in favor of Total Control. And I can understand why, because Total Control had a uniqueness about it. It's for the most part, Total Control is a heavy metal record, but them adding those subtle R&B and funky influences, it gave it such a nice groove that it just made that record different than what most heavy metal bands were doing at the time. But although Speed of Light lacks like that subtle uniqueness of their debut, it's still a really great follow-up to that record. I mean, I think they really showed, along with the Born to Rock EP, I think they really showed that, hey, they are a true heavy metal band and they know how to play metal music. That's what they really did with this EP. And yeah, it just, Stanley E, I wish Stanley E would have been able to be a part of this, because he played on the Born to Rock EP, even though that record was more straightforward heavy metal. But it would have been nice to see what he would have added to this style as well. But at the end of the day, I think Speed of Light is an awesome '80s heavy metal album. I think it's criminally overlooked. For the most part, this is a traditional heavy metal album with European power metal influences. And to me, this record could have easily competed with the likes of Iron Maiden, Judas Priest, and all those countless European power metal bands that emerged in the late '80s. Helloween ended up coming out sometime. Well, no, Helloween was already out at this point, but they weren't doing the European power metal style yet. But that album, Keeper of the Seven Keys, would come out the next year, which would totally put European power metal on the map. And I think that this record could have really competed and been in those same reigns with those type of records. A lot of those bands started emerging in the late 1980s, and I think Speed of Light was a record that would have fit right. It would have fit well in with those bands at the time. But so after this album, Sound Barrier, they will break up after the release of Speed of Light, with the members moving on to various other projects. So the original lineup ended up reuniting in 2013 for a benefit concert for drummer Dave Scavito Brown, who was at the time he was battling cancer. And despite his illness, Dave actually performed on stage with the band. I have to watch that full show because it is on YouTube. I've only watched clips of it, but I do know he performed Rock Without the Roll with them, and I think he did Born to Rock. I'm not quite sure if he performed the whole entire set with them, but sadly, Dave ended up passing away later that year in 2013 from his cancer. I think it was around November of that year. So rest in peace to him. In 2017, Sound Barrier, they reunited with a new drummer named Eric Valentine, and also original bassist Stanley E was back into the fold. They signed to Tom Morello of Rage Against the Machine. He has a label called Firebrand Records, and they released a new single called "I'm Just a Man" that same year. And I think they also released another single in 2019. I remember looking on their Spotify and seeing something from 2019. Now the band's current status, I don't know. I don't think they've released anything new recently, so I don't know what their status is. I don't know if they're still active, if they're still doing shows or what. I just don't know what's going on. Their Instagram account, I follow them on Instagram, hasn't really been updated in a while. It seems to be that the members are still focusing on their various other projects and so forth. So I don't know if the band is still together. I hope they are, because I would really enjoy hearing some new music from Sound Barrier, because they are a really good band. Hold on for a minute. Definitely check out both of these records. Unfortunately, Total Control is not available on Spotify or streaming services, so you can listen to it on YouTube. There are a lot of people that have uploaded the full album on YouTube, whether it be individual like clips or a full stream. You can definitely go check that album out on YouTube if you want to listen to it. I'm telling you, really great record. Speed of Light is on Spotify. Is on Spotify. This is the only full-length album that they have on their Spotify right now, so you can listen to Speed of Light on there. Don't overlook this album. It's different. They go for that European power metal sound on here, but it's still a really great follow-up to Total Control, so definitely check that out as well. And check out their new singles too that they've recently put out, or the ones that they put out as a recent, because those songs are pretty dope too. Alright, so that's it for this video. CD update number 25. on Black Death and Sound Barrier. I was really excited to really do this video, man, because I think these are two bands that really need to be talked about more. That really need to be shared with so many more people within the metal community or just in music in general, man, because they are both two pioneering bands that are a huge inspiration to a lot of people. They have some great music out there, and I think everybody should go out and check out these records, because you're gonna be, because you're missing out on some great heavy metal music if you haven't heard them. Shout out to both bands for the influence that they've held, for breaking down the doors, for breaking down barriers, and opening the doors for bands like Living Color, 24/7 Spies, and so many countless other like black heavy metal artists and rock musicians. Like I just want to let them know that they are a huge inspiration, and for people who may not even be musicians within the scene, like people like me who really enjoy the music, who go to shows, they both of these bands are a big inspiration to me and so many countless other people. So a big shout out to them, and I'm glad to see that they're all still active. They're all still doing music and they're doing shows, and I hope that everybody that checks out this video will go and check out their music. I'm telling you, you won't be disappointed. A lot of great music, some really great raw, gritty, powerful heavy metal, man. So I know some of you out there are going to enjoy it. So like I said, that's it for this video. Hope you guys enjoyed. If you did enjoy this video, please like the video, share the video, as well as hit that button and subscribe to the channel. That way you'll be notified when I drop new content. Also, I want to thank everybody that's been subscribing to the channel, everybody that's been watching all my videos, that's been showing support. I really do appreciate that. And as always, hope everybody has a blessed day, a blessed week, and love, peace, and music. Peace out, y'all.